The French Revolution of 1789 has had a major impact in shaping ideologies and movements, not only in France but also on the modern world. A society based on privileges gave way to a new system of governance, with the establishment of a legislature, executive, and judiciary. France thus became a constitutional monarchy. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen during the Revolution announced the coming of a new time as it promoted the ideals of liberty and democracy. The revolution gave the world the basis of human rights through its slogan of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The idea that all individuals had rights and could claim equality was responsible for changing the role and position of women in society. It also led to abolition of slave trade that was rampant in most of the colonies up until the 19th century. These notions of equality and freedom emerged as the central ideas of the anti-colonial movements in countries like India and Africa. Women in France were active participants in the events that were shaping the French society in the 18th century. Women, mostly of the Third Estate, worked as seamstresses, laundresses, flour, fruits or vegetable sellers in the market. They would even work as a domestic help in rich households. Most women were not allowed to study or acquire job training. Only the girls of the nobles or girls from the richer families of the Third Estate could study at a convent, after which they were married off. Working women, besides being less paid than their male counterparts, had to work in the house too. They had to fetch water, cook, stand in queue to collect bread, and look after the children. To make their voice heard, these women started their own clubs and newspapers. It is believed that about 60 women's clubs were set up in France in that period. The most famous of the lot was the Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women. One of their main demands was women should enjoy the same political rights as men. But they were greatly disappointed when in the Constitution of 1791 they were not given any political rights and instead were considered as passive citizens. Women demanded they be given the right to vote, to be elected to the assembly, and to hold political office, as only then would their interests be protected. The condition of women gradually improved during the early years of the revolutionary government. Not only were schools created, but schooling for girls was made compulsory. They could no longer be forced to marry against their will. Marriage was in the form of a contract and registered under civil law. Divorce was made legal and law was made equal for both men and women. Women could train for jobs, become artists, or start their own business. Yet, women were not given the political rights. During the Reign of Terror, the new government issued laws ordering closure of women's clubs and banned their political activities. Many prominent women were arrested and a number of them executed. Olympe de Gouges was one of such revolutionary women. She protested against the fact that women were not given representation in the newly drafted constitution. She wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women in 1791. In 1793, when she criticized the Jacobin government for forcibly closing down women's clubs, she was tried, charged with treason, and was executed. The fight for political rights for French women continued for decades to come. It was finally in 1946 women in France won the right to vote. France had its colonies in the Caribbean islands of Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Santo Domingo. These colonies were major suppliers of commodities like tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. But the Europeans were not willing to go and work in a far-off and unfamiliar place. This led to shortage of labor in the plantations. This led to the development of a triangular slave trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. French merchants sailed from the ports of Bordeaux or Nantes to the African coast. Here they would buy slaves from local chieftains. These slaves were then branded and packed tightly in a ship and brought to Caribbean islands to a 3-month-long journey and sold to plantation owners. These slaves were exploited to meet the demand for goods like sugar, coffee, and indigo in the European market. Port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes flourished due to the successful slave trade business. Slave trade flourished throughout the 18th century as no concrete attempts were made to make it illegal. Finally, the convention in 1794 declared all slaves free. But this was short-lived as Napoleon reintroduced slavery. Slavery was abolished in all French colonies in 1848. Now, let us summarize the points covered in this session.